Well, welcome everybody to another special edition of this EdUp Experience podcast. We are in episode 3 of a 6-part mini series that we're calling The Currency of Change. And once again today, my co-pilot is Dr. Jamie Brownlee-Turgeon. She is the Vice Provost of Graduate and Professional Studies at Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego, California. And my name is Andy Bennis, and I'm the Associate VP of Marketing and the Interim VP of Enrollment at Los Angeles Pacific University. Happy to be with you again today. And if you remember, we last talked about, in terms of change, some of the challenges of mindset, kind of the whole, we've always done it this way, the resistance to change. And we talked a little about the importance of data and numbers to help steer you through change. Well, not just running the day-to-day business, but all of it. So we're back. Good news for listeners is that it's not just us two today. We've actually got a really intelligent guest who knows what we're talking about. Dr. Frank Rojas is joining us for today's episode, and his doctorate work was in organizational development and change. So this topic is right up his alley and near and dear to his heart. So before we talk about anything else, let's welcome Frank. Good to hear from you. How are you?
I am good, and I just want to clean up a few things you said.
Uh-oh.
First of all,
did I get the name wrong?
No, you got the name right. But the first thing is, I don't know if this group is going to be fortunate enough to hear from me or not. You had to bring out the big guns, and so I hope they're in store for an engaging, entertaining, and maybe controversial conversation.
There you go. Yeah, that's probably the best disclaimer we could put up front. That and the fact that, just so that everybody knows, at one point in time, it was a sweet lightning in a bottle moment, but the three of us actually were colleagues at the same institution for a nice, fun little window. So if you hear some, I don't know, like we know where the bodies are buried type banter, that might be why. But I would like to, that won't be only why, but you'll sense some dynamics there.
Something's going to come out.
Yeah, as long as we keep it from getting too personal, because we could do that. So this episode, Frank, we're basically talking about this notion of turning things around. And I think anybody who's worked at any institution, I don't care what style, what size, what niche, specialty, private, public, whatever, at some point, folks realize either in their own department, their own division, their own whatever, that something's got to change. And they finally come to grips with the fact that, look, we're either trending in the wrong direction in some places, or we've stalled out, or there's actual negativity, right? Something's just not working. And so we got to fix it, turn things around, whether it's a remodel or a tear down and rebuild. That's sort of the theme today, is turning things around. So I think the first question, or the first area to discuss, is this whole, when we get this general sense that something's got to change, but I think a lot of times, and Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, but because I think everybody on this call right now has been through some level of organizational change, from the minor to the massive. The first question that comes up is, okay, what is it that needs to be fixed? I know something's wrong, but I can't quite put my finger on what's wrong. So how have the two of you gone through that process of identifying what's actually wrong, in case it's not super obvious, right? What's actually wrong, so you identify the what before you dive into the how, right? So Jamie, let's start with you. How did you identify, in places you've had to do change, how did you identify the what to fix?
Well, you have to come in and listen and observe, and not assume you know what's broken, not assume that what they told you might be broken is broken. And, from your experience, look through that lens, knowing the landscape of higher education as well, and listen and observe. You need to see, from the real tactical all the way up to that high level strategy and philosophy. It could be any of those things, and you have to be open to it. I think when I see leaders fail is when they walk in and they're like, I already know what's wrong. And it's like, you've been on the job 2 weeks. Really? It's but then how much is too much time before people are like, we brought you into change and you haven't done anything. You just keep listening. So it's balancing that, but you have to do some observation.
Yeah. Frank, how do you know what to fix?
Yeah, I think it depends, right? And, when I'm walking into a situation that requires change, the first thing I'm asking myself, is this like an episodic thing, or is this sporadic? And what I mean by episodic, is this caused by something internally? Is this caused by some change in the business condition? Is there a change in people, process, technology? I try to understand what has changed that has caused the change to happen, right? And if it's episodic, then you can kind of, to Jamie's point, go back and figure out where things went sideways.
Okay.
If it's sporadic, sometimes things just respond to something that's happened in the environment, right? We think about what's happening with the FAFSAs and how that's impacted our business. That is an unseen, a sporadic condition that we've all had to respond to. And my approach to managing that kind of change is completely different than a response to managing a change because we have a new director, we have a different lead mix, we have a new program that's not taking off, new leadership. So I think to Jamie's point, there's certainly a level of analysis, but the first kind of rubric I run it through is, man, is this thing episodic, or is it just some kind of strange sporadic thing that happened? And that will determine, and that helps me determine what's the best kind of triage plan or plan to mitigate the change or address it,
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
I want to jump in on that. I think that a great way of describing that, Frank, I would look at an organization and say, are they good at addressing the constant change that needs to take place in the industry in general? If they're not, when they get those one-offs like the FAFSA, it is going to be, I think it's going to hit them worse because they're not already accustomed and nimble and flexible and willing to say, oh, we need to adjust.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It makes sense. Because again, how many layers of the onion do you have to peel? Is it, to Frank's point, is it systemic? Is it recurring? I'm also wondering, and then Frank, I heard you about to chime in, so I want to hear what you have to say. Do you guys see yourselves having to separate when we talk about the core issue or the root cause, people, processes, systems? Do you do any kind of division like that on where it might be coming from, whether it's any one of those or a combination of those?
I do, absolutely, because it's like he said, is it mindset? Is it politics? Is it just structural? I mean, if it's structural and you just need to change a system, that's fairly, I don't want to say any change is simple, but it's easy to see and find. But what if it's political and there's dynamics in an organization that are happening that would undermine any type of shift? You have to understand all of those. And so I would assess based on some categories.
Yeah, I think the other thing to your point, Jamie, is what's the organization's history been with change? Change and change management is really complex. And I giggle sometimes when people, ask about what's a change management playbook. And there are so many variables, right, that dictate how successful a change is going to be. What's the organization's history been with change? Do they have the organizational precedents for change? Is there the right leadership in place? Is this an organization that's had a series of unsuccessful changes or attempts to change, right? And so as I'm trying to assess that, Andy, is it people, process, technology? The first thing I take a step back and say, what can I learn from an organization when I'm looking at their previous change initiatives?
Right.
That will tell you in and of itself. It might not tell you what is broken or what needs to be fixed or what needs to be changed, but that will tell you how you might want to think about approaching the change event. Because what do we know the definition of insanity is? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yeah.
And I think we all have been around our industry enough to know that seems to be a default position sometimes, especially when it comes to driving change or responding to change events in the environment.
Yeah. And when that theme came up in episode 1, the resistance to change, the whole, I mean, look, higher ed is notorious for the Titanic versus the jet ski, right? I mean, it's turning the Titanic generally when it's got to go through committee, it's got to go through the academic senate, or it's got to go, I mean, whatever the layers are of resistance to change. Then you roll in the mindset, then you sprinkle in some politics just for good measure, and holy mackerel, you're lucky if anything changes. So on the what to fix side, it sounds like there's that theme of you got to look at history, you got to look at as many variables as you can. To your point earlier, Jamie, don't take a year to do it, but do an assessment, do as much surveying, formal or casual, as you can to just assess, look at the numbers, assuming they've got dashboards or KPIs that they actually measure in the key areas. But then once you start to identify it and we start to talk about, all right, now we know something's got to be done, I think the next question on a leader's mind, whether you're a manager, director, VP, dean, so whatever the level is, wherever you're in the hierarchy and whatever your span of care happens to be, The practical question, which is where I want to go with you guys, because you're both very successful operators, meaning you know how to get stuff done. The issue becomes how to fix them. And I think the way you address people, processes, and systems is different, right? How you tweak them, fix them, replace them. How do you fix something without breaking it, right? We've all used this analogy. I know we did at our time together. We've got to repair the plane while it's in the air. Right. And everybody uses some version of that cliche, but let's start with the how. What do you do first? I mean, you're leading people, you're about to initiate this change. You got to start going to get some buy-in, or maybe I'm assuming you have to. Do you have to get buy-in? What's the first thing you do when you realize you got to initiate some change?
Yeah, I can tell you for me, it's almost unequivocally the first thing I do is just take a deep breath.
Good call.
Well, but here, y'all got to hear me out on this one.
It's this one right here. That's the deep breath.
Yeah. and it's mostly because change is scary, even for somebody who's leading through change, right? And that kind of deep breath gives me a moment to think, at least to start thinking through that I'm giving myself permission to be a little bit anxious about this, because independent of whether I've led 1,000 change events or 100 change event or one change event, they're all different. And there's always a risk involved. And it's just human nature to have a little bit of anxiety. Yeah. So for me, I just take a deep breath and say, you know what, you know how to kind of navigate this thing. Trust yourself, trust the processes that you used. You have all the tools in the toolbox and just go out there and get it done. I mean, so I give myself a little pep talk, and all of that happens in that magical moment when I take a breath.
Can I add to that? I think you,
of course you can.
Highlight. Yeah, well, I'm asking if I can. I'm going to. You know me.
I expect nothing less.
But Frank speaks to emotions, and in change, it's not just changing a process and fixing a system. There are people. And every person's going to have an emotion. And so recognizing that not everyone's going to follow your emotional path. So you as a leader have your own that you're processing, but you also have to manage the people you're leading and their emotions through that process, creating space that some are going to be slower to it. And you might have to invest more in them to getting them to that buy-in point. I think leaders, again, thinking about a lot of change initiatives fail. We know that it's over 50%, so we can just put that out there. It's, I think, because we don't care about the people. We have to, change management is people management.
Or you don't take the time to address them. You might care, but not take the time to formally address them in the process.
Yes.
All right, so you all ready? I'm going to take you to church here.
Okay.
Buckle up, Buttercup.
Buckle up. So I had somebody very wise and very a lot smarter than me once told me this about change. How do you expect me to be on the plane when you land if I'm not on the plane when you take off?
That's
powerful.
Good image.
Church. You ring a bell or do something, but that's my point. There we go. How do we expect those that we're leading to change to be with us when we're there if they're not with us when we begin, right? And so part of that is, to your point, Jamie, just taking a moment to try to assess where people are at and recognize that some people are going to jump right in. Some people are going to be resistant. Some people are going to be reluctant. And that's okay. But if your goal is to have those people with you when you land the plane, they got to be there when you take off. There's just no other way around it.
Which leads right to the communication piece, whether it's one-on-one or to the team or the entire community. I remember when the three of us were together, one of the milestones in our history together was a rebranding of an entire university from a 120-year-old brand to a brand new brand. Massive change. And one of the biggest pieces of that entire puzzle on the front end was communication. How are we going to communicate this to our staff, to our faculty, to our students? There's going to be this weird overlap where for a few more years, some of these people are going to get a diploma in this name. Some are going to get a diploma in the new name. We're going to have this weird crossover for a few years, right? And what we said, when we said it, how we said it, all mattered a lot just to get people's minds around what was about to happen.
Yeah, I'm going to go theoretical here for a moment and talk about John Cotter. John Cotter is one of my favorite scholars. And, expert in change, and he's got the 8 stages of change. And the first 4 are just about preparing for the change, not even the change itself. And so we have to be thinking about all of the prep we do on the front end helps with the implementation, the buy-in, and the successful, implementation on the back end. If we skip that step, those first 4 stages, and we just jump into going, it's like he's talking about, we're on the plane and we're going, but nobody actually got on the plane with us.
Right.
We have to be
Then we're
diligent.
surprised that they're lost when we get there. Yeah, and I think that's why, to your point in today's theme, turning things around, whether you're talking about implementing a new piece of software for one department, right? That's a very localized change or fixing of something versus something that affects the entire organization, the entire institution, right? So really macro. How to fix things that aren't working or need to be improved has to start with that buy-in. So on a practical level, what have been the most successful ways you guys have gained buy-in? How do you build that consensus before you even take step 1 of the actual change?
Yeah. So, well, Jamie, since you went to Cotter, I'm going to have to go into Cotter too. And, you got to build your coalition. You got to build
Mr. Cotter, or is it different?
No, it's not. What do you think? I'm Horseshack? Come on, man.
Ooh, 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 ooh.
Ooh, 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 ooh. Oh, holy smokes. If you're not in your 50s, you probably don't understand that culture relationship. But the fact of the matter is part of this, part of what you're talking about, diffusing that change, Andy, is you got to have evangelists. You got to understand where the locus of control is. Where's that political capital? And you've got to get your advocates out there who can help evangelize not only why this change is important, but how people are going to play a role in the change. It's not just the why, but okay, people understand why. I understand we have to do this, right? But how do I fit into this? What's my role in this? And again, if I don't have a role in this change, I'm not going on the plane. You know what I mean? So I think for me, maybe one of the most powerful tools is just getting some evangelists out there, understanding who the voices are in an organization that can serve as evangelists, make sure they're on board. We all need people like Paul Revere and telling us that the British are coming.
Right. Even though full well some people might get on the plane, but they're kicking and screaming, right? They're being carried by a couple other people and they're resistant. And again, I don't want to rabbit trail us into change management, but this issue of, all right, something needs to be fixed. And like to your point, Frank, we need our advocates to speak positively to the why. Because I think anytime you disrupt somebody's status quo, one of the first things they ask is why? Why do we have to do this? Why is this important? And too many times, whether it's relationships, Frank, you mentioned church, name any organization that's full of people, one of the things that's often missing is the why. Somebody with authority makes a decision that something's going to happen, and everybody's just expected to fall in line because he or she said so. And you just miss an entire opportunity to gain some advocates, to gain some positive momentum and have people at least understand the why. My mindset was always, I'm a big context guy, right? So in terms of Clifton strengths, context is always up there for me. I need what I used to call the mental shelving first. Like I need to understand where, what, why, the big picture. Now you can start giving me the details. This is what we're doing. This is when we're doing it. This is how we're doing it. This is the impact to you. This is how you need to be prepared. But those are details. Until you build for me that mental shelving of the why, and what does the end product look like, and why is it necessary, why it'll be a better future state. Until you've taken some time to do that for me, I'm not, even if I was going to say I'm not a willing participant, even if I am a willing participant, you're not going to get the best out of me if I don't understand the context and the reason behind it. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But to Frank's point, whoever's leading this charge can't be the only voice. So you look around and say, who are the influencers? Who can I get to also gain buy-in to this that can go and speak on my behalf to all these other people? I'm doing it too, right? Mm-hmm. But I need a lot of voices. The more voices I have, and those where people trust them, maybe they've been with the organization for a long time, they don't have to have the title. They have to have the respect and that
belief.
Yeah, and belief. Like their buy-in, that's going to go volumes, especially for someone like Frank and me who come into an organization. We're change agents, Frank, whether we like it or not, right?
Yeah.
We are. But But we're brought in for something like that. That starts to make people nervous. People don't trust us from the get-go. So who do I lean into? That's why recognizing the politics. Who are the people that they do trust? Mm-hmm. That's who I'm going to get buy-in from, and then they're going to talk about it. Now it's a different type of change.
Yeah. And it's almost like having to go get a second opinion medically, right? I mean, just because you say it's so, is it so? And so people are looking for some validation on, is this thing that this leader is calling a problem that needs to be solved or an issue that needs to be fixed, is it in fact an issue? So sometimes it's just raising awareness of, hey, let's take a very honest look at where we are right now, call it what it is, and then agree on what the future state might look like and get people excited about it. But if we don't agree on where we are now, let alone where we're going to go, it's a mess from the start. Mm-hmm. Frank, what were you going to say?
Well, no, I was just going to give Jamie a pat on the back for teaching me something new. I always thought people were afraid of me because of my 2-foot beard looking like I just got off of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle.
Yeah.
You just clarified for me it's because I'm a change agent.
No, I didn't say it wasn't because of that beard, okay?
Well, you've got the ZZ Top thing going fairly well, but yeah, if you put change agent on the back of that leather jacket, it might be a twofer that people can't overcome.
It's a twofer.
There you go, twofer.
That is too much.
Oh my goodness! So I haven't heard that in a long time.
A twofer. So here's the related question, Frank, to your plane in the air. Fixing it while it's in the air. Let's assume you got the people you need on board on a practical level, because I'm sure some folks listening are thinking this all makes sense to me, but I'm still trying to figure out how I go about doing this and get the day-to-day done. I think all of us have been in positions where we need to implement a change or introduce change while still running the day-to-day work, right? Still running the business, still keeping things afloat while you're changing. And any quick thoughts on how do you do repairs without, one, breaking it and making things worse, or two, having to have everything come to a standstill while you fix it? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so I know this is going to sound like the typical MBA answer, but it depends. Here's what I mean. Seriously, you can't use a hammer to drive a screw in, and so it depends on the type of work you wanting to do. Theoretically, let's just say I'm involved with this massive project about maybe acquiring an institution. And in my role, theoretically, if this is what I was going to do, I still have to do my job of driving enrollment, right? My title is Vice President of Enrollment Management. But I'm also tasked with helping make sure this integration happens. So I've got like 2 full-time jobs now, and I've got people who work under me who have to help make this happen. First of all, we have to be realistic on what people can do and what they can't do, right? So in this instance, and this magnitude of change requires that I build a parallel organization to help facilitate the change, so I'm not disrupting the business as I go forward. So the strategy and maybe an acquisition is you've got to build a parallel organization to help facilitate and integrate the two institutions that are going to merge or be acquired, right, without disrupting the business conditions on either. Now, that's an expensive proposition.
It is.
But that's the approach I would take.
Time and human capital, right? So, but here's the question, Frank. I got to assume that most of those people, when you talk about building a parallel organization or at least a parallel project, most of those people are also doing other things in the institution in question, right? So everybody's wearing multiple hats for a minute or two.
That's right. Yeah. So leadership has to be very reflective, looking at the work that needs to be done and the work that, as a result of the change, and the work that needs to be done to keep the machine moving. And they have to make the organizational investments in people, in process, or in technology to bridge the gap, because if you don't, you're going to burn people out. And this goes way back to one of my first points. If the organization has a history of just dumping more work on people and expecting to drive these big change initiatives, for example, I don't bother changing, because it's going to fail. And I've actually told organizations before, listen, we can try to do this, but unless you're ready to make the different type of investments that you've made in the past, why bother? You're just going to frustrate yourself, waste some money, and burn your people out. Maybe sometimes status quo is good enough if you're not going to invest in it.
Yeah.
On the flip side, if it's a smaller change, you might have to prepare people to wear 2 hats for a period of time. But in that case, you have to be very clear You have to set boundaries and expectations of what the work is, and it needs to be time-bound.
Yeah. And and I think that's a big piece, Frank. You touched on a couple of things. And by the way, I realize in not giving you your title, we didn't mention your institution, but Frank is the VP of Enrollment Management at Bay Path University in Massachusetts, which is almost as far away from Southern California as you can get, where Jamie and I are sitting. So this is truly a bi-coastal experience right now. And I know, Frank, you guys are going through that now with your merger, and we don't need to get into too many details, but there's a lot of preparation and discussion and all that stuff. But something you said reminded me of an important issue, and I'd love to hear from both of you on this: managing expectations. Because Frank, you just used the phrase preparing people for ... right? Whatever that is. At some point, managing expectations, like people are willing to go through hell or high water if they know what to expect and they believe in the vision of the final, goal. But managing expectations is no small part of this, from the frontline, contributor to the leader of the entire project. How do you do that? How do you appropriately set expectations for everybody who it's going to touch?
Well, let's go back to that airplane. I know in complex or significant change events, and even smaller, change initiatives, Andy, I make sure that the leadership team is very clear on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And it's creating, sometimes it's a 1 or 2 page, charter of what this change looks like, and having, in some case, a physical signed off by an executive team saying, I agree that this is what we're trying to do. These are what the objectives are, and, timelines and things like that. So I think it starts with the top down. Do that for 2 reasons. Number one, you get buy-in, right? If you don't have executive or leadership buy-in, it's just never going to happen. Number 2, if they're going to put their name to it, guess what? They own part of that change. Yeah. And sometimes, we've heard this before, success has a lot of mothers. Failure is what? An orphan. Yeah. Right? And so if you get people to commit to the change early on and take ownership of it, the likelihood that they're going to let it wither or die diminishes because their name is attached to it now.
Right. Well, and politically, they're less likely to say, I didn't agree to that. Because if this thing drags on for 6 months, everybody forgot who started it, why we started this, where we were going, whatever. You've changed vendors a couple of times, if it's external, whatever. And all of a sudden people get selective amnesia. Well, I don't remember agreeing to that. So yeah, to your point, it's not necessarily documentation for the sake of documentation, but it doesn't hurt.
Well, we document everything. We do. Wait, let me just speak to this real quick, because we do have someone sign off on it. We document, and we also look realistically to say, hey, how many people, like let's say it's you, Andy, how many groups change initiatives is Andy working on? How many is he leading? Okay, that's too many. Is it someone in his group that can step in? Maybe someone else needs to take charge. Maybe this one needs to be tabled for 6 months because this is the priority. So we're constantly looking at and managing our time to help set those expectations. But Frank, this is wisdom from Frank that I gained a few years back. Wow. I know. We worked together. I learned from you, Frank. But
smokes.
I use it with my team, and it's constantly asking, like, what percentage of your time is on your day job versus on these change initiatives? And it has to be an appropriate amount. It can't be 95% on your day job and 5% over here. We're not going to get anywhere. And we have that conversation regularly, so I can say, whoa, you're spending 70 on the change initiatives. I can't afford that because the day-to-day is going to fall apart. So we talk about that and we negotiate. People step in and help, but you have to have that be part of the conversation and dialogue. So thank you, Frank, for that wisdom a few years back.
Wow. God, something you said stuck, Frank.
I was just about to say, even a blind pig finds a truffle once in a while.
So wait, are you the truffle or the pig? I'm lost.
Yeah, be careful who you say is who in that analogy.
Well, I'm saying that I sometimes I stumble on wisdom.
There you go.
And that is really just stumbling. But here's the deal, right? Speaking of stumbling, as I try to change the topic, but here's kind of a deal, right? Part of why I like to look at how organizations have approached change is what happens if the change is not successful. What are the repercussions? Who gets hung out? does somebody lose a job? Do they look at it as great? We learned at a way not to do something. Now let's figure out how to do it. Do they,
Right.
you can learn a lot by successful change events, especially about organizational culture. But I can argue you'll learn 10x more by the events that failed and what has happened. And organizations where you see a lot of reluctance or resistance to change in general are organizations that have not embraced shortcomings in change initiatives. And so people are afraid to innovate because they know that there's a loss of political, social, economical. There is a loss of some kind of capital. And who wants to sign up for that?
Right. Especially if it's going to be seen as this needs to be pinned on somebody or this needs to be blamed on somebody rather than, okay, we're going to chalk it up to learning and keep going. I think for those who don't think that way, there's as much variability in organizational personalities as there is in individual personalities, right? Somebody with high expectations, a perfectionist who hates failure, has to get it right the first time or they won't even bother trying, versus somebody who's willing to, the old Edison technique, like, oh, I didn't fail umpteen hundred times, I just learned umpteen hundred ways to not invent the light bulb. But that's a mindset thing, and organizations take on a mindset of their own. It's usually top down, right? Leaders drive that culture, generally speaking. But it's a difficult thing to overcome if like you said, people are going to be gun shy. I mean, psychological safety is a phrase, a popular current phrase, right? The whole concept of are people free to speak up about concerns, about a counter voice? How is that received? Is it shot down and humiliated, or is it welcome to say, good point, let's make sure we consider, or whatever? How is it received? Matters.
Boy, oh boy, there's something about being with the two of you that just get my mind going. So,
Love it.
But here's the deal, Andy. You mentioned psychological safety.
You're welcome.
So I have. Well, listen, I've never been psychologically safe around you or Jamie. So maybe it's being 3,000 miles away from you that are making me.
We're going to file that under things that won't be shared in the podcast.
Yeah, but all kidding aside. But here's the deal. You made an important comment about psychological safety. And, I have grown and learned a lot since the last time we worked together. And when I first started here a couple years ago, it was a very interesting organization that had gone through some changes like most of us do, particularly that related to the pandemic, the demographic cliff, all the other things that we're facing, right? And the organization, my enrollment management organization, and the other teams that reported up to me were blocked. There was a block in psychological safety. And so I added one simple question at the end of every team meeting, and I did it faithfully for a year until I got my first response. And now I get responses pretty regularly. So if you want to test the how psychologically safe your organization is, ask this question. What are we not talking about that we need to be talking about? I asked that question probably 50 times for the first year, and I got no answers. But when people understood that I had a genuine interest in knowing what those things are and then trying to solve them, and there were no repercussions for bringing them up, and man, we unblocked my organization. And guess what? A psychologically safe organization means more grounded, more joyful employees at work, which typically mean better outcomes, right?
Yeah, and tying
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, tying it to our earlier theme, that buy-in, consensus, advocates, all those things are helped by everything you just outlined.
Yeah. So I would challenge you and Jamie and anyone else who has this fortitude to listen to this conversation. Ask that question and be consistent in asking it. And the day you get your first response, and it might happen from the first time you ask that question or the 50th time, but the day you get your first response, how you respond to it will dictate if you get other responses as well. And I had just learned that feedback like that is valuable. Yeah. And it's not because I want to get more from my team. It's just I genuinely care about the people I work for, and I want to make sure they have a joyful experience on the job.
That's awesome. What a great note to wrap up on, Frank. I think that's, again, coming as far as we all have in different angles of this industry, working with the common denominator is always people. There's always somebody out there who knows more or smarter in a given area. That's why we usually go to vendors when it comes to technology, because we know that ain't us. But turning things around, changing things, I think the theme that rose to the top very quickly, as I think through the common thread of our whole conversation here, is people. How we treat them, how we set expectations, how we invite them along for the ride. We've all been voluntold in the past, and sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it stings. Sometimes it causes resistance. But I think in this whole issue of how to fix things, when to fix things, Jamie with the percentage thing that she credits Frank with, who's on the verge of being overwhelmed. So you might have a good idea for something that needs to be changed or implemented, but maybe now is not the time. Being sensitive to the timing, not even sensitive, just smart. People and time, people, and money. You only have so much of each. How do we allocate that in a way that brings us the best outcome? And obviously, including people in the conversation, keeping them informed, setting expectations, making sure there's psychologically safe space to do that, where they don't fear retribution, they don't fear shame for a quote unquote dumb idea or any of that stuff. I think, and it all amounts to removing roadblocks to the stuff that we're trying to change or turn around or fix. Because unfortunately, in the end, we've all been a part of those changes that can be a poster child for the wrong way to do it. You're going to do it because I said so. This is where we're going. Yeah, but I don't. What? And nobody gets a voice, and all of a sudden you're over budget, you're over time, you're losing morale and losing momentum. And so there's a cost for doing it wrong, and I think there's a cost for doing it right. I think the good news is we spent most of our time talking about how to do it right. So
yes,
yay, you guys. Dr. Rojas, it was wonderful to hear your voice. Best of luck at Baypath and all things. I know you have no shortage of initiatives on your plate, so we are grateful for you carving out some time for the podcast, and as always, just fun to hang out.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure, and good luck to y'all. Andy, Jamie, y'all be well, be amazing.
We will, absolutely. Thank you all for tuning in. So join us on the next episode 4. We're going to be talking about pulling on the same end of the rope. How do you get departments that sometimes compete to actually work together? So there's your little teaser for the next episode. Otherwise, until then, this is Jamie and Andy coming to you with this mini-series on the currency of change, a special edition of the EdUp Experience podcast. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.